He's 82 years old now. His hands shake slightly when he holds his coffee mug, and his voice has that fragile quality that comes with age. But it's not his trembling hands or quiet voice that defines him anymore. It's one sentence he spoke 3 years ago. 7 words that a younger person heard and has carried like a stone in their chest ever since. Most people think they understand what regret sounds like. They imagine dramatic confessions or tearful apologies. But the deepest regrets don't always arrive that way. Sometimes they come as simple observations, spoken without malice, without anger, just cold truth wrapped in resignation. And when those words land, they don't just hurt in the moment, they echo. If you've ever felt the sting of realizing you disappointed someone who mattered, if you've ever replayed a conversation wishing you could change what was said, this story might feel uncomfortably familiar. Because what he said that day wasn't meant to wound. That's what made it so devastating. His name is Robert, though most people called him Rob. For 60 years he worked, first as a machinist, then a floor supervisor, eventually a plant manager. He was the kind of man people described as reliable, solid, the type who showed up 15 minutes early and stayed late without being asked. His life had a rhythm to it. Wake at 5:30, coffee, toast, shower. At the plant by 7, home by 6:30, sometimes 7. Dinner, television, bed by 10. Weekends were for yard work, home repairs, and catching up on sleep. It wasn't glamorous, but it was respectable. It paid the bills. It provided. And providing, he believed, was what mattered most. He married young at 23 to a woman named Carol who worked as a nurse. They had 2 children, a son first, then a daughter 5 years later. The house was modest but clean. There was always food on the table, clothes that fit, a safe neighborhood. By every practical measure, he did what fathers were supposed to do. But somewhere in the machinery of providing, something else got lost. His son, Michael, grew up watching his father leave before dawn and return after dinner was cleared. Birthday parties where Rob arrived late, still in his work clothes, smelling of oil and metal. School plays where an empty seat sat in the 3rd row. Little league games where other fathers shouted encouragement from the bleachers while Michael scanned the parking lot hoping. Rob always had reasons, a deadline, a problem at the plant, an emergency that couldn't wait. And there were real reasons, legitimate ones. But to a 10-year-old boy, reasons don't fill the empty space where a father should be. Michael learned not to ask if his dad would come to things. It hurt less to assume he wouldn't. By the time Michael was 15, they developed a kind of distant politeness. They lived in the same house but occupied different worlds. Rob told himself it was normal. Teenagers drift from their parents. It's natural. He didn't see the pattern forming, the emotional distance calcifying into something permanent. Looking back now, there were moments that could have changed everything. Small hinges on which large doors swing. One Saturday, when Michael was 16, he asked his father if they could go fishing. Just the 2 of them. Rob was replacing the deck boards that afternoon, he said. Maybe next weekend, bud. Next weekend came with a different project, then another. The fishing trip never happened. Michael stopped asking. Years later, Rob would remember that conversation and feel something crack inside his chest. His daughter, Sarah, was quieter than her brother, more accommodating. She learned early that Dad was busy, that his work was important, that asking for his time felt like asking for something he couldn't spare. So she stopped asking too. She brought home report cards with straight A's and placed them on the kitchen table where he'd see them eventually. She performed in the school orchestra and scanned the audience, already knowing he wouldn't be there. She learned to celebrate her achievements alone, to translate them into updates she'd share over dinner in 30 seconds or less, before the conversation moved on. Rob thought he was building security, a foundation. He thought his children would understand when they were older, when they had bills and responsibilities of their own. He thought the sacrifices he made, the long hours, the missed moments were deposits into some account that would pay dividends later. Love expressed through stability, through health insurance and a roof that didn't leak, through college funds and family vacations they took once a year, where he'd spend half the time checking messages from work. He thought they knew that his absence meant he cared. But children don't understand that translation. They just know who shows up and who doesn't. When Michael turned 18, he left for college 6 hours away. He called home occasionally. Brief conversations where he and his father exchanged facts but not feelings. How are classes? Fine. How's work? Busy. The calls got less frequent. Michael graduated, got a job, moved even farther away. He came home for Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving. His visits grew shorter. Sarah followed a similar path. College, then a job in another state, then a life that existed mostly in photographs Rob saw on Facebook. Both kids were polite when they visited, respectful. But there was a distance there, a formality, like they were visiting a relative they barely knew. Rob noticed it, but didn't know how to bridge the gap. The silence between them had become a language he didn't speak. Then Carol got sick, stage 3 cancer, aggressive and fast-moving. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March, and suddenly the rhythm of Rob's life shattered. He took leave from work for the first time in 40 years. He sat in hospital rooms and learned the names of medications and held his wife's hand through treatments that made her too weak to stand. Michael and Sarah came home. They took turns at the hospital, coordinated schedules, managed prescriptions. And during those strange, awful months, the four of them were together more than they'd been in decades. Rob saw his children as adults. For the first time, really saw them. Michael had a quiet confidence about him, a steadiness. Sarah had become fierce in her gentleness, the way she advocated for their mother with doctors. Rob felt proud and heartbroken at once, realizing he'd missed watching them become these people. Carol died on a Sunday morning in October. The funeral was large. She touched many lives as a nurse. Rob stood at the reception afterward, accepting condolences from people who told him stories about his wife that he'd never heard. Acts of kindness she'd performed, patience she'd advocated for, the way she'd made people feel seen. He realized with a dull ache that Carol had built something with her life that he couldn't quantify. Connection, presence, the kind of wealth that didn't show up in retirement accounts. After the funeral, Michael and Sarah stayed for a week to help sort through their mother's things. The house felt too big and too quiet. On the last day before they returned to their lives, the three of them sat at the kitchen table. Rob wanted to say something meaningful, something that would bridge the gap he'd finally recognized, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, Sarah asked him a question. She asked it gently, without accusation, but it landed anyway. She said, "Dad, do you have any regrets?" He looked at his daughter, then at his son, both of them watching him with careful, neutral expressions. And in that moment, something in Rob broke open. Not dramatically, quietly, like ice cracking under weight. He didn't say he wished he'd spent more time with them. He didn't apologize for the missed games or the forgotten recitals. What he said was simpler and somehow worse. He looked at them and said very quietly, "I don't really know. Either of you." 7 words. Michael's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Sarah looked down at her hands. The silence that followed was thick and terrible. Because what could they say? It was true. He'd been there physically, a fixture in the house, but emotionally he'd been absent. And now, at 82, with most of his life behind him, he was admitting that he'd somehow missed the point entirely. He'd worked to provide for them, sacrifice for them, but he'd never actually known them. Their fears, their dreams, the small daily details that make a person real. He'd been a provider, but not a presence. Michael left the next morning. Polite goodbye, promised to call. Sarah hugged her father at the door and told him to take care of himself. Then they were gone, back to their lives, and Rob was alone in a house full of evidence of time he could never reclaim. Those 7 words haunt him now, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. The truth delivered too late to change anything. He sits in his living room most evenings, the television on but unwatched, and thinks about all the moments he traded away. The fishing trip that never happened. The recitals he missed. The conversations he was too tired to have. He'd believed he was building something for them. Security. A future. But what they needed wasn't security, it was him. His presence. His attention. The kind of knowing that comes from showing up consistently, not just materially but emotionally. If you're watching this and you have children or people in your life who matter, pay attention to this. Providing isn't the same as being present. Working hard doesn't substitute for showing up. Your kids won't remember the size of the house or the brand of their shoes. They'll remember whether you were there, whether you knew them, whether they felt seen by you. Rob learned this truth, but he learned it in a hospital room, watching his wife die with children who'd become strangers. Don't wait for tragedy to teach you what should have been obvious all along. Time doesn't pause. Children grow up. Opportunities to connect expire quietly, and you don't get them back. At 82, Rob still has time left, maybe years, but he can't reclaim what's gone. He can go back to when Michael was 16 and say yes to that fishing trip. He can sit in the 3rd row at Sarah's school play. Those moments existed once and then evaporated, and no amount of regret can resurrect them. What he has now is the weight of understanding, delivered too late to matter in the ways that count. If someone younger is watching this, hear this clearly. The people you love need your presence more than your productivity. They need you to know them, to see them, to show up not just physically but emotionally. Before it's too late. before you're sitting alone at 82, looking at photographs of people who feel like strangers, carrying 7 words that can never be unsaid.